Thank you. Thank you all for getting up so early today. What a nice introduction. Now, when I heard about the plans to have a 50th gathering of HBS women, I warned the dean. We always have an angry waiting list for the Fortune World's Most Powerful Women's Summit, no matter what we charge. It's the second most profitable franchise after the Fortune 500. And when I lent the Time Life Auditorium several years back to a New York gathering of women alums, the fire marshals had to step in. It was so oversubscribed. So I don't know what happens after today, but there was a waiting list for this event. You can't convene the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pantsuits. Fire us up and not follow up, Dean. I had a really lovely time yesterday. We have a lot to talk about today. Rosebeth Moss-Cantor says it best, I think, that in times of crisis, what you often need is not more leadership. You need more leaders. And just like Sheryl Sandberg, yes, I have read the bloody book. But I completely agree with Sheryl. Of course, until I saw Robin Neely's results yesterday, Sheryl needs a rewrite on her second solution, that men will do their part in the home and with child rearing. Not gonna happen in my lifetime. But women are well equipped to lead. I agree that the world would be better off with more of us stepping up to the corner office. The book, by the way, is funny in places. I laughed out loud when the young woman defined a mentor as someone she spoke to for at least an hour every week. Sheryl's reply, that's not a mentor, that's a therapist. So please read this book yourself. You know, I just don't even understand all the controversy over it, right? Pinch me, please. Isn't it 2013? Or did I doze off in class and I just woke up and I'm back here and it's 1976? That's the year I entered HBS, and before I forget, here's a shout out to the 22 of you from the class of 78. That is an unbelievable turnout. There weren't that many of us. And you know what? We look really good, if I do say so myself. We were in one of those first classes at HBS to be allowed the use of an HP calculator. My husband thought it was cheating. He had already graduated from the Sloan School at MIT, where only slide rules were allowed. As you might have read, I only had one full-time job out of HBS. I retired from Time Inc. after 33 years. I managed a fairly large business in good times and in bad. I recommend the former. Besides working for the same company, I am still married to that same man for almost 40 years, and I have absolutely no clue how decades have flown by. Have you ever noticed that time seems to go faster as you get older? Time is, in fact, the single most cherished resource that people have or don't have these days. If you give an employee a choice of an extra week's pay or an extra week off, they will pick more time overwhelmingly. We waste a lot of precious time. The average American woman spends 55 minutes a day just looking for things. At Time Inc., it's true. At Time Inc., we launched Real Simple magazine over that single consumer insight, and it's a home run. I hope that all of you have found or will find the same kind of happiness and fulfillment and balance that I did find in my own career. I have told this story. Jay just said it on the tape. I had a dozen offers when I graduated from here in the 70s. I did take the lowest offer on the table. It was from Time Incorporated, and I took it because I just loved magazines. People thought I was crazy, but I became the president of People and eventually the chairman and CEO of all of Time Inc. And I did not look so crazy at my 25th reunion. So, to the youngsters in the audience, lesson number one, forget that clock. Get yourself a compass instead, because the direction you're headed, far more important than how fast you're going. One big reason, by the way, not to be in such a hurry is that you might miss the fun of the journey. In 30-plus years, I have been to most of the Olympics since Lake Placid. I always sat on the 50-yard line at the Super Bowl. I threw out the first pitch at a Mets game, not just once, 3 different games. Now, this always impresses men in particular, and I don't know why, because it's not very hard to do. I've been to the Oscars, the Grammys, the World Series. I've rung the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. I've rung the closing bell. I've been around the world many times, once in 5 months, once in 11 days on my G550. I don't recommend the latter. It's really uncomfortable. I had such a cool job. I once borrowed the real Declaration of Independence, just for a day. I've had dinner with President Hu at the Great Hall in Beijing, with the President of the United States in the White House, and with Harry Potter at Hogwarts. I've met every living heavyweight champion. Listen carefully. Do not allow your children or grandchildren into a ring, no matter what. I've met movie stars, politicians, musicians, scientists, and CEOs, but the biggest thrill of all for me is still Sunday night dinners at my house. I cook, especially when my 28-year-old son and his 28-year-old friends will come over for one good meal, because some of their paychecks still barely cover their New York rents. My husband and I both still live for Sunday night dinners. Now, one of the most amazing weekends I ever spent was in 1996 raising money for cancer research in Chicago with Diana, the Princess of Wales. It was just before the divorce, so she was still a royal family at the time. And at the last of 3 events, a luncheon at the Drake Hotel, I handed her off to the publisher of InStyle, who said, "Your Royal Highness, you must be looking forward to getting on the plane home after lunch." And the very beautiful, very hardworking princess said, "Not really, because tomorrow I'll be back in the palace, all alone." So much for childhood dreams of being a fairy princess. Every frazzled working woman at the table, including Katie Couric, was speechless for a moment. None of us ever forgot it. So lesson number 2, whatever career path you take, whatever choices you make, try to go home to Sunday dinners, not to an empty palace. There's nothing wrong with money, but the richness of our lives won't be measured by it. Now, these are really challenging times to lead change, no matter what your gender, your brand, your business or city, or country for that matter, since the financial crisis has swept the globe. I cannot count the number of times I turned to the Harvard Business Review to find inspiration for my management team, for myself. I remember handing out copies of How to Seize Advantage in a Downturn. Smart people see recessions as an opportunity, a rare one, this article said, to right-size, to tackle the too-hard-to-do pile, and to position themselves for the future. You know, I did this so often that I trained others at Time Inc. to read the Harvard Business Review for me. Martha Nelson, now the first female editor-in-chief at Time Inc., sent me a January 2005 article that she had been carrying around for years called "Why Smart People Underperform." I still recommend reading this, and it's 8 years old. I had started to observe that people couldn't seem to get everything done on time. The author, a medical doctor, believed the problem was ADT, attention deficit trait. It turns you into a kind of a frenzied underachiever, and its cause is brain overload. As the internet exploded, I was seeing a lot of ADT behavior in the workplace: no-shows, late arrivals, curt behavior, impatience, missed deadlines. The article said if you were feeling a constant low level of panic and guilt, you could have ADT. What are the remedies? Well, it helps if you're working in an environment of trust and respect and getting enough sleep, a good diet, and exercise. It might surprise you to learn that more human contact, like talking to people instead of emailing them, is known to relieve ADT. Keeping your desk clear, okay, or at least a small little space. and tackling the toughest problems in the morning when you're fresh are good tricks. Writing down a short list of priorities for the next day before you leave the office. Slowing down, listening, empowering your assistants, taking a 5-minute break. These are all mind-clearing tricks to break the logjam in your life. Now, Martha assigned 5 editors at People magazine to study our BlackBerry addiction. They discovered our IQ had dropped 10 full points once email had invaded our offices, and that we were spending 75 full days just on email management. So we took action. We issued the 10 email commandments. We limited non-essential email on weekends and evenings except for breaking news. We encouraged people to pick up the telephone or meet face-to-face and talk to each other again. Can you imagine that? The 10 commandments included a ban on the reply to all button. Our goal to reclaim 15 days in our lives. You know, I still, all these years later, rarely hit the reply to all button. Unfortunately, I seem to be in the minority on the planet. I actually think there's a lot of wasted time and effort in America. I'd like to see everybody get back to their real work during the workday so they can reclaim some of their personal lives in the evenings and weekends. But I'm retired now. So what could I possibly be worried about today? As we're starting to see signs of the recovery, as our portfolios have rebounded, I'm worried that we didn't seem to learn much from Katrina or the collapse of Lehman or the bankruptcy of GM. I'm disappointed that we didn't make better progress on bridging the gender gap, the pay gap, and access to boardroom tables. I'm worried that the minute I step out of the room and off the stage, even the little progress I made over 30 years could be wiped out. A little example, in 1989, I launched my first magazine, SI for Kids, and I insisted it be written for little girls, not just little boys. I took a lot of grief in the press. Little girls don't like sports, said one know-it-all consultant. It will fail. But the first letter I received said it all, from a little girl in Brooklyn named Iris. Dear Mrs. Moore, I love your magazine so much, I'm probably going to fall out of my chair and hurt myself. But not long after I left Sports Illustrated to run the People division, all the women left, and SI for Kids turned very male. I don't know about you, but I'm not spending my twilight years playing catch-up again. I got through HBS in the 70s when there wasn't even a proper ladies' room in Aldrich Hall. I played basketball in the 60s with that stupid 3-dribble rule. I had to go out of state for college because my state school, UVA, was all male. I've spent my lifetime catching up. I caught up. So let's not slip behind again. So, I'm worried at my age that at best history will repeat itself. After all, it always does. At worst, we will regress. After all, Washington is more polarized and dysfunctional than I can ever remember, I'm sorry to say, and I grew up there. Our public schools are failing. I hit massive potholes as I cross a bridge with rust spots that worries me every day. And even though I personally know more billionaires than I can count on my 10 fingers and 10 toes, there is still unspeakable poverty and suffering in the world. Time magazine's cover story on the worst decade did a good job, I thought, of summarizing why so much bad stuff happened to us. You know, the worldwide economic crisis, the war with radical Islam, even the shameful response to Katrina, we attributed to 4 things: neglect, greed, self-interest, and deferral of responsibility. But has any of that really basically changed? Are we really wiser and more prepared to deal with new challenges going forward? Let's take the media industry for an example. You know, I see this fire hose of too much information having unintended consequences on your productivity, your mental well-being, and on your children. Will they ever know how to deep read, questioned Eric Schmidt one year at Davos. I don't know. Let's talk about unintended consequences in your media consumption, right? So what is there to worry about? Well, number one, news magazines, newspapers, serious journalism has been disrupted. Good editors and reporters should be needed more, not less, in an age of too much information, because sketchy information can lead to trouble. Do I need to remind you of the price you paid for the rumor of weapons of mass destruction? The wisdom of the mob can't always react fast enough to correct rumors, and you don't have enough time to wade through it all yourself. For a democracy or a free market to work best, Daniel Patrick Moynihan used to say that everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but not to their own set of facts. This is not a new problem, by the way. Mark Twain complained, "A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes." Wouldn't Twain be surprised to see it can now travel almost at the speed of light? Real reporting takes wisdom, expertise, and judgment. I do believe that our children will eventually understand that all content can't be free. Somebody's got to pay for the Baghdad Bureau and the Red Zone, for investigative reporting, for fact-checking, for music, for books, for movies. And I'm rooting especially hard for journalists and the newspaper business to survive. The second unintended consequence of the current media transformation I worry about reminds me of the marshmallow test. Do you know what I'm talking about? This was research done by a Stanford psychologist in the 60s. 4-year-olds on camera were given a choice to eat one marshmallow now or wait an unspecified moment to get a second marshmallow. You can Google these videos, and they're really funny. Most of the kids really, really wanted 2 marshmallows. But in the end, only about a third of them had the self-discipline to wait the 15 minutes. Years later, the professor followed up and discovered that the children who waited for the second marshmallow had, on average, 210 points higher scores on their SATs. Self-discipline and the ability to tolerate delayed gratification were the correlation to intelligence. Does anybody here but me worry that delayed gratification doesn't seem to be a quality that is growing in the next generation? Since they have come to expect and demand instant answers to everything in their life, instant information, instant communication, instant promotions at work. Thirdly, I worry about the decline of serendipity or accidental discovery in our society. I worry that there's something lost in the process of getting all our information online, what I call self-editing. You know, surfing the web is not deep reading, okay? It's surfing. It's browsing. That's why they call it a browser. Nielsen did some eye-tracking research that interests me. We use biometric research at Time Inc. It's been very valuable in predicting single-copy newsstand sales. You know, when you're online, your focus moves in an F pattern. You scan horizontally, then you might drop down to see something that's caught your eye for just a brief half page. What I worry about is that you're only dropping down to take in stories that you already seem to know about. You're reading about people you already know, opinions that you already share. I worry about your incidents of accidental discovery. I mean, how can you search for things that you don't know? In this vast proliferation of news stories and opinions, are we actually getting kind of more parochial on our information intake? And will you fail to stumble upon that gem of a story brought to you by the professional who works for you as your personal editor? Or are you just going to read the tweet from your best friend who lives down the street anyway? He shares your same views from the same neighborhood. Are we losing our serendipity? Are we becoming narrower-minded? And finally, here's a real far-out thought to keep you up tonight. It started for me with an article in the Times, a British newspaper that somebody mailed me. It describes the physiological impact of too much information on the brain. In essence, when you're in brain overload, your body goes into survival instinct, and you start making decisions by bypassing your prefrontal cortex. You run on automatic, so to speak. You're making decisions back near your brainstem. We can function just fine in this state of steady stress for a long period of time. So what? Well, the worry is that the slower-acting prefrontal cortex of human beings will start to atrophy. You're not going to use it anymore? It will shrink in human evolution like your tails and your wisdom teeth. Okay, so why do we care? Because other interesting human things are located in the prefrontal cortex, like wisdom and empathy, altruism, tolerance, and emotional stability for a few. This information overload, this constant level of stress of having too much to do in too little time, might be the first point in man's evolution that we begin to regress as a species. How's that for an interesting topic for your dinner table tonight? And maybe not a dumb idea to unplug for an hour or dismantle that reply to all button just in case I'm onto something here. Well, I feel so much better sharing what's been on my mind with all of you today. Thanks for reminding me I made a very smart career move many years ago when I enrolled at HBS, and then when I took that offer from Time Incorporated. Oh, and one last plug for the Harvard Business Review. I used a December issue for my retirement speech. I think the article was What Brain Science Tells Us About How to Excel. Play at work, says this article. It's not an oxymoron. People perform best when they're at play. You know, it made me remember a plane trip to the West Coast with Dick Parsons, then the chairman of Time Warner, and my boss, and Wayne Pace, our CFO. Poor Wayne. He was like slaving over spreadsheets on the plane. Dick was rewriting his analyst speech. So I reached down and plunked out the make-ready of Sports Illustrated. And I read it in front of them all the way to LA, thinking to myself, just who is the smartest person on this airplane? McKinsey published a report a while back that said meaning is the motivation that drives leaders, particularly women. With meaning, any job can be a calling. So while I set out in 1978, just like Cyndi Lauper's hit single, looking to have fun, instead I found my calling at Time Inc., and I hope you all have too. What you should be searching for those of you who haven't found it yet, says this December article, is flow. The state in which a person is so caught up in what they're doing that you lose self-consciousness. For 30 plus years, the chance to work with really clever people on extraordinary brands, getting paid to read magazines, debating the issues of our times, and making a real difference in the world has been a joy. I was in the flow. And to keep up with changing media habits and to adapt to change, to lead change, well, that was a challenge. And by the way, all stress is not necessarily the enemy in our lives. Some of it, if it's not toxic stress, can really be the key to growth. Betsy Frank, who is Time Inc.'s research director, always sends me great stuff to keep me thinking in my old age. She once sent me an article about sunshine being the harbinger of optimism. I think it was a New York Times article. It reported that when the sun came out after a snowstorm, it sends shoppers into the stores in huge numbers, reminding us that cycles govern our lives and that winters, like recessions, do end. Betsy also sent me the Tuna Casserole Index. This is the number of tuna casserole searches, which completely correlates with the ups and downs of the stock market. The worse the market conditions, the more the tuna casserole searches. It's the responsibility for all of us to be vigilant to the signs of unintended consequences, to keep deep reading and wisdom and curiosity alive, to mentor this next generation of young women, to get our economies growing and working well again. As Fortune magazine's ad campaign once reminded us, flat is not, was not, and never will be the new up. One of the most interesting books I still keep on my desk, almost, it was written by Rick Stengel, the editor of Time. Rick spent almost every day of 3 years following Nelson Mandela around as he collaborated on Mandela's autobiography. This book is a little gem. It's called Mandela's Way, 15 Lessons on Life, Love, and Courage. By the way, I asked Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, of all the people she had met in her lifetime, who was the wisest person on the planet? Mandela, she said without hesitation. Mandela, who knew it was a long game better than anyone, tells us why courage is more than the absence of fear, why we should keep our rivals close, how to lead from the front, how to lead from the back, the importance of having a core principle. And the answer is not always either or, but often both, and how important it is for each of us to find the satisfaction in our own gardens. And for those of us who take on too much every day, most of you in this room, this book is a reminder that no is a complete sentence. I love this book. I love this book. As we take things for granted, as we contemplate the legacy we will leave, and as we worry about the stability of our world. So I'd like to make a toast this morning to our economic recovery, to all the young women who will follow us to HBS, to more women leaders, to more sunshine and serendipity, and to less tuna casseroles in our lives in the coming months and years. As my friend Billie Jean King always says, and I think it applies to all of you who live and work in these turbulent times, remember, champions adapt, and pressure is a privilege. So thanks for inviting me to join you this morning.